People hate to hear this, but being against the giant corporation doesn't automatically make you correct. Kian Bros recently posted a YouTube video in which he detailed his interactions with Mojang and their responses and actions back towards him, more or less threats towards him and other gun server owners, something which he didn't like, and so he's now suing Mojang. Honestly, good for him. I'm glad he's doing it, but I do have some issues with the way he presented his case.
And unlike some third world countries like the United States, meaning that I must have been a really young 12-year-old corporate entity, how they're currently forcing developers onto their own marketplace so they can charge extremely exorbitant fees for no reason.
Okay, actually, this last one is wrong on so many levels. There is no marketplace for Java for them to be able to force players or modders to use. Also, I wish they took a 30% fee. Also, the Bedrock marketplace literally has a capped number of signups, and so they constantly will not take enough people, and so the problem is too few people are able to sign up to the marketplace, not that they're forcing everyone onto it somehow. But anyway, the point that is raised in this video is a very good one. The underlying point is that Mojang has treated him and his server extremely poorly, and I don't think that's a good thing to do for the modders and server owners that are sort of the backbone of the Minecraft community. And so in today's video, I wanted to detail the actual details behind the situation, and I know that there's going to be some unpopularity behind that, but I feel like the truth is much more important than the easy hate story, and that is why I'm sharing it today, starting with the beginning. So here's the deal. Kian spent months creating a Minecraft server, turning Minecraft into a first-person shooter game. He spent a lot of money on this and then announced a release date.
And this is where everything went wrong.
Mojang enforcement started sending notices to servers that they were breaching the rules. Indeed, that they had activities that were specifically prohibited by the Mojang brand guidelines, commercial guidelines, and EULA. Kian obviously had some big questions about this, and so they gave a clarification that the compliance issue was with purely guns and firearms and not weapons, as there are already weapons in the game, such as the bow and the sword. We do not allow the use of real-life guns and firearms within the game, as that is considered adult content, and this is a very concerning response. So we had some big questions about how he could become compliant, but their response was that a couple of key decision makers are on holiday, and they'll follow up once the right people had the chance to look at different server scenarios and then provide better guidelines. But
6 months is how long it took them to reply.
This sounds like beyond poor form from Mojang. You should not take that long to answer some questions, especially when you're the one wielding the threats. And to be fair, they did respond to another server owner, Grand Theft Minecraft, saying this, that they could temporarily use guns and semi-realistic weapons on third-party servers and all of these other little clarifications, but they said the following is not final, and therefore, as Kian puts it, it's legal for now. This is not a reassuring position to be in if you're a server owner trying to build a business on something that Mojang have said, yeah, we might just change our mind on that and shut you down on later. And so this is where he begins his legal case, and he concludes after looking into it that since the EULA hasn't changed during this entire process, that they can't change the rules on him now or later, and so he tells everyone that this is true, making sure he gets as much coverage as possible. If you remember the big EULA scandal, this is where that came from, and so Minecraft does respond with some guideline changes that are pretty generally unpopular. You can always tell when that's going to be true because they label the article as being written by Minecraft staff, but yeah, in either case, despite publishing this big set of changes and reiterating what their EULA is, there does remain a gap between the agreement and the enforcement, as Kian brings up.
In the end-user license agreement, they specifically state twice that any form of gambling, violence, terrorism, or other unsafe and mature content is strictly forbidden. Which totally makes sense, but what if I told you that the gambling part was a lie? You see, in Minecraft, when you look at any of the biggest servers, you'll quickly notice a recurring pattern in their shops. They have something called crates and crate keys. These keys are used to play lotteries inside of the game that have a chance to give you extremely overpowered items or more money than anyone else.
This is true, and I'm actually surprised it is, given how unpopular loot boxes are. It feels very unfair that they are just not enforcing this, but it's very much the situation they find themselves in with the gun thing too. They are in a situation where Minecraft has a EULA that they're threatening to wield but currently are not, and so because this doesn't result in any changes to the wording of the EULA for them to actually fix the issue that he's worried about, he tries to start a lawsuit and then concludes it costs too much, tries to get the Swedish legal system to assign him a lawyer as he is due under his EU legal rights, but they say they can only promise 100 hours of legal time, so he contacts the government body that regulates government bodies and they say, you have reported the legal aid institution. What has emerged merge does not give us a reason to go through with the report. Reports are an important source of information on the JO's job. Even if your report is ignored, the information you provided could be useful for JO. The case is closed.
Now, when all of this started, I never wanted this to be a lawsuit. I simply expected Mojang to not be assholes and be reasonable. And the way I tried to do this was by collecting all of this information and sending it to media outlets and news sources, knowing that it would create a ton of backlash that Mojang simply couldn't ignore.
And so now that all of that has failed, he is looking to the public to crowdfund his lawsuit. The video thankfully blew up, and he actually raised around $100,000, and for most people, this is where the story ends. Maybe in a few months there'll be an update, and Mojang will change their EULA, or start enforcing it one way or the other. However, this is something that I figured I would have to jump in on, because this is where the but actually comes in. At this point, you might be saying, surely Mojang have to respond to this, surely they have to update their EULA, and surely they have to back down from what sounds like illegal processes. However, the entire story you've heard so far has been from Kian, and so is one side of the tale. And so what is the other side? Well, I tried to do as much research as I could outside of the one person telling me, and let me tell you that first of all, this sounds like what happened is he launched the server, and then Mojang came after him and threatened him till he had to shut it down, but actually, it seems the server did in fact launch last June on its intended release date, and then it relaunched this September with this great looking trailer. Honestly, it looks very fun, but in both cases there were lots of complaints as far as I could see that the server was always dead and there just weren't enough players. Based on the timeline of when the server was up, we can assume that what shut it down in the end, because it currently isn't active, is not the Mojang EULA enforcement team coming after him, but instead the lack of a player base. And this really sucks. I empathize with anyone who puts loads of time and money into a project that they know is good and that looks incredible, but which doesn't go well, but you can't say this is Mojang shutting him down. And so if there was to be a lawsuit, generally lawsuits are about recovering damages dealt by another party, or indeed about criminal negligence in some cases, but which of those is he trying to prove here? Because you can't argue there's a lot of damage done, besides perhaps in the harassment of Mojang trying to enforce brand guidelines that don't exist?
Specifically prohibited by the Mojang brand guidelines that literally do not exist, but which they cite multiple times anyway.
This was something that appalled me when I first watched the video. For Mojang to use non-existent, or at least non-searchable brand guidelines and use them to enforce on creators is terrible. And if that's the impression you got too, that's a valid one. However, all of these points that he raises are actually things that you can find in the usage guidelines, something that comes up when you actually Google brand guidelines. And in fact, when Minecraft talk about changing this, as they did last year, they call it the brand and usage guidelines and just give you a link to this page. The non-existent brand guidelines is just him taking an issue with what they sometimes call it versus what the official title for the page is, and that is not a valid legal defense, and it's close to lying to the viewer at best. He is conflating the idea, a very valid one, that Mojang has the ability to enforce certain terms in different ways and they change what they consider to enforce. He's conflating that idea with the very legal agreement which underpins it, which has been the same the entire time. In fact, he must know this because he references that, yeah, they're not enforcing one of the terms in this, a valid point when he talks about gambling, Minecraft loot boxes not being very popular. I don't know why they don't do that, but he references this same exact point here, and similarly, he also talks about
why is it okay for Mojang's own marketplace, where they get a cut of every sale, to have guns when we don't get to have them?
Even though for some reason you can have blasters and a Nerf gun if you really want one. I do agree with Kian that this is ridiculous because, as he points out,
because it's totally not like there are thousands of games that literally have guns and weapons in them that are made for children.
But despite the fact that I would love Mojang to change their stance, because let's be honest, the distinction right now is dumb and the line that Mojang draws is not very clever, they have effectively given us a safe harbor. A safe harbor is a guarantee that something is okay, and right now they have clearly laid out the guidelines that even though they're not sure what they think about guns and firearms, they're very sure they think about blasters, and that's that they're a-okay. If you are a server owner, or you're making a map or a world or an add-on or anything else, all you've got to do is label your guns blasters and say they don't shoot bullets, they shoot blaster pellets or Nerf pellets or anything else. You can keep literally everything else the same and be 100% okay, with the current solution being even easier because, as Mojang have clarified, right now you don't even need to worry about that. Right now the decision isn't final if they're going to enforce on guns in the future, and right now you're allowed to just keep doing what you're doing, so I don't understand what the big problem is. It sounds like Mojang are trying to enforce a EULA very unfairly, and I definitely agree Mojang enforcement are very heavy-handed in some cases, but in this case it looks like they mostly backed down. even wilder in my opinion, and something we don't give enough credit for, is that when they changed their EULA and their usage guidelines last year, there was a bit of a storm about it because they didn't go far enough for some people, but they actually did give more rights to players. Forever they've had this rule that, yeah, when you have a Minecraft Java mod, if you create it, you own it. However, if you try to sell it, or if you try to charge people to access your server with it, that's not okay. They actually clarified that it's totally fine to do so via Patreon and other services. They added in a section that means you can make handcrafted Minecraft goods, and as long as you don't make more than 20, you're allowed to just use the Minecraft IP that way. That is incredible. No other company would do that. They would just turn a blind eye, and that's why we've seen so many other games which hold all of the rights, so many more than Minecraft, shut down fan projects of basically everything from Nintendo to Call of Duty, and it means that there is ultimately a much more friendly policy in place at Mojang, and I think that this video makes some very good points, those being the fact that Mojang's policy on guns versus blasters is ridiculous, to put it lightly. They need to make something that is much more consistent, but also I think it's true that spending 6 months responding to people about their concerns of your game is bad support anywhere, but especially when it comes to you legally enforcing things on them. And then finally, the legal point of substance on which this entire case does seem to rely, which is you cannot have a get out clause in the European Union. That is to say, you can't have terms which allow you to get out of providing a service just because it doesn't suit you, but which still binds the consumer. This is a good regulation and is basically saying you can't have one-sided contracts, but the Minecraft usage guidelines say that all permissions are consent and are given by us at our discretion and may be revoked at any time if we think that it's appropriate to do so. This is the main point in the video, and indeed, this is one that is legally easily defensible, but even then, I think only if you are proving that they have used it against you, right? If there is an illegal part to any contract, then generally just that part of the contract is unenforceable. But the thing that I think is kind of crazy here is when he talks about the goals for the end of the fundraiser. So the fundraiser has raised another $10,000 since I started this video, and he states that his goal with this legal suit is that Mojang should be forced to pay out a massive settlement to each and every one of its users bound by digital contracts, that Mojang is forced to pay damages to children who develop gambling addictions as a result of Mojang facilitating gambling for children, and that Mojang is forced to update all of its contracts to comply with current consumer protection laws and contract laws. So that first one, obviously, there is no damage being done to people by signing a deal that has a get out clause, because Mojang hasn't used that get out clause on you yet, so I think that's a hard one to argue. And even then, a massive settlement, Minecraft has 300 million players. Even the entire sale value of the company divided by the number of players would be $8 each. I do think that paying damages to children who develop gambling addictions is a bit more of a weird one here. I feel like you would need specifically complainants who were actually developing gambling addictions, which is not him. He has an issue of a different part of the EULA. And finally, Mojang being forced to update its contracts. This is something that might happen regardless of what happens in the Swedish legal system, and which would probably be a good thing due to the number of issues that people have with these very same contracts, which seem to be the discussion of controversy after controversy in the community. But at this point, it's time to conclude. There is a valid and fundamental question in the IP laws that govern us, which allow for a company which produces a game to say that anything made in that game also belongs to them, but that is the current legal situation. Games are treated like movies, where if you were to splice a Disney movie together, you wouldn't be able to say that's your property, but is a Minecraft YouTube video or a mod or a map actually owned by the person who made it, or is it owned by Mojang? For whatever reason, the legal default is for that game to be true, and so most games subsequently have much stricter rules about it. I mean, imagine modifying Super Mario 64 to have guns and then trying to sell it. Okay, apparently that's a real thing, but imagine trying to make money out of it. Nintendo would sue you so hard, and so Mojang are in a tricky situation that they could easily resolve by making clear that pretend guns are fine, or maybe by asking for an adult content warning on any server that isn't going to pretend their guns are fake, or some other solution that isn't waiting for months to respond. Their behavior here has not been perfect, but we can also say by looking at this situation that we are not lawyers, especially not specializing in Swedish contract law, but what I can say is that every Swedish government organization doesn't think that this case has merit, or at least enough merit, and even with all of the money he's raising, dealing with the world's most valuable corporation on an issue where they are well within the norms for the industry is a challenge to say the least. I still wish him luck. It sounds like he invested a lot of money into a thing that Mojang aren't going to let him recoup, and even if the laws say one thing, I think Mojang would be best to give some goodwill to the community that ultimately built their game, and I think that that is something that applies to us all the same. Anyway, I had a lot of people asking me to make this video, and I hope that those people knew that I would come out into this stance, because ultimately every story has two sides, and the sooner you realize that there isn't just good and evil and black and white in the world and it's a lot of grey, you'll be a lot better off. Speaking of better off, in the update to the GoFundMe, Kean is here at the Mojang Studios office, which is a fun update because we now know that if you go to the Erie Mojang Studio offices, launching on Monday, you'll get a cape if you complete 5 challenges. That has now been confirmed from Minecraft.net, and so a fun update if you made it this far through the video. And I don't think I said hello, I'm IBX Toycat yet, so hello, I'm IBX Toycat, and I'll see you next time.